Okay, so today we're going to look at the Pythagorean Theorem. And one important part of the Pythagorean Theorem is that it only works in right triangles. So you need a right angle for this to work, where a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, a and b are what are called the legs of the right triangle. And the legs are the sides that make up the right angle. They create the right angle. That's what the two legs do. Now, C is called the hypotenuse. And the hypotenuse is always across from the right angle. So, if you're looking at the right angle, you go across from it, that's the hypotenuse, that side right there. Now, this is here twice with a squared plus b squared equals c squared and a squared plus b squared equals c squared. But notice the a and the b are flipped. What this is saying is that for the legs here, it doesn't matter which one's a and which one's b, because addition's commutative anyways. So like if this is b and this is a, that's totally fine. The important part though, what has to be true, is across from the right angle, c has to be the hypotenuse. So across from the right angle, this is the hypotenuse. This goes all by itself on one side of the equal sign. All right, so to get home from Sinatra, you walk 770 meters north, and then you turn and you go 450 meters west. So you travel up, over. However, at the same time, a bird flies directly from our beautiful little rooftop straight to your house. And since pesky birds don't have to avoid buildings and walk on streets, they can just fly straight there. So, how far did the bird travel? Well, here's the first important thing here. What we need to do is, we know that this is a right angle because you were going perfectly north and then perfectly west, so that would form a 90-degree angle. So what that means is that across from the right angle right here, this is your C, this is your hypotenuse. And it doesn't matter which one of 450 or 770 is A and B, so I'm just going to label that A, that B, doesn't matter again. So what we're going to do here, we have A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So let's fill in the values we have. Our a is 450. We're going to have to square that. Get your calculators. And b is 770. Square that again. Calculator. Fun times. And then what we have here is, we don't know. We can call it x. We can leave it as c. Whatever you want. I'm just going to call it c. I'll leave it as c. And we'll solve for c in this case. So the next step, what we have to do is we have to square these values. So 450 squared gives you 202,500 plus 770 squared is 592,900, and that all, of course, equals c squared. So what we have to do now is we just add up the two values on the left. And when you add those, calculators are very helpful right now. You get 795,400 equals c squared. Now remember, we want to get c by itself. So in order to get c by itself, we have to get rid of this pesky square right here. And the way you do that is you take a square root on both sides. So if you take a square root, that cancels out the squared. And you take a square root on the left side as well, because if you do something to the right, you have to do it to the left too. And when you take the square root of that, you get about, I'm going to round it off to the nearest meter, you get about 892 meters for C. So the bird travels 892 meters. However, you had to travel 770 plus 450, you actually ended up traveling 1,220 meters. All right, so this is pretty much exactly the same problem, but I just want to show you a situation where if you have to solve for one of the legs, it makes the solving process just slightly different. So we're going to use a squared plus b squared equals c squared, the Pythagorean theorem. And once again, across from the right angle, that's your c. And again, it doesn't matter which one's A and B. I'll keep it consistent. That's A, that's B. All right, cool. So let's plug in the values. We don't have an A, so we can just leave that A squared, or you can put X, whatever, if you feel comfortable either way. Plus 770 squared, and that is equal to 892 squared. So we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to square the values we can square here. So first off, a squared can't be squared. That's just a squared. Plus 770 squared is 592,900. And that is equal to 892 squared, which is 795,664. Of course, everybody knows that, right? Yeah, no, I know. It's a pretty rough number. So what we have to do now, we have to solve for a. You want to get a by itself. So in order to get a by itself, eventually we're going to have to get rid of this squared. But first, we got to get rid of this 592,900 on the left side here. So the way you do that is, of course, just subtract 592,900 on both sides. And you get, of course, you get a squared equals, because those cancel out there, you get 202,764. Whew, fun. What a number. So now, finally, we're at the solving point here. We got to get rid of this squared. So in order to get rid of the squared, take a square root on both sides. Those will cancel on the left. And you're left with a equals, guess what? Same number we started with before. About 450. And, it's not perfect because we did a little bit of rounding to find that 892. So the only difference here, if you already have C, what you want to do is you just plug everything in, and then you need to subtract at one point before you take the square root. Like the last slide, we just added these up and then took a square root to find C. But in this case, we're going to have to subtract away one of these values over to here, then take a square root at the end. So that's the difference between the two.